A lot of us picture Native Americans eating turkey, squash, and corn with the Pilgrims on Thanksgiving. But the reality is that Native American diets have extraordinary variety and have for millennia. Food played and still plays an important cultural role for Native Americans when it comes to ritual and spirituality. And a lot of it just seems tasty. From highways of kelp to the first North American sausage to a mango-like fruit you'd never guess grew on the East Coast, here's what the Native Americans eat. Seminole alligator wrestling. The Seminole tribe of Florida is the only Native American tribe to never have signed a treaty with the U.S. government. They're known as the Unconquered because of this, but after successive wars with the government that lasted into the 20th century, they were pushed farther and farther into the Everglades, and farther into alligator territory. The Seminoles have been hunting alligators for thousands of years, long before Europeans ever made it to the continent. One of their alligator hunting techniques is called fire hunting. From a canoe, one hunter would take a burning torch and thrust it into the eyes of an alligator while his partner would put a spear through it. If you couldn't blind and stab the prehistoric Floridian beasts, you might have had to wrestle them. Alligator wrestling was a pretty important part of Seminole culture. It was a way to capture them and then breed them, a better, more sustainable option than just stabbing them with a spear while they were being blinded by a torch. Once the alligators were caught, they'd traditionally be taken to the cookhouse, a raised platform with a high roof made of bark or reeds, similar to the houses they lived in called chickees. They'd expertly butcher the gator, paying special attention to the tail meat and the ribs. Since gator meat tends to be tough, they'd often tenderize it by pounding it with a hammer. From there were a few ways to cook the meat. They would roast it over a fire, or fry it up in a pan, or even braise it in a stew. You can find all kinds of alligator recipes these days, a lot of them inspired by the Seminole. By the 1900s, Seminole alligator hunting morphed into what can only be described as a tourist attraction. Europeans driving down to the fast-developing Florida coast would see Seminole people struggling with 10 to 15-foot dinosaurs on the side of the road and want to stop and take the 1950s version of a selfie. As the years went on, it morphed into a whole industry of people paying to see Native Americans dressed up in traditional garb fighting alligators for sport instead of sustenance. Tiswin, booze from corn and cacti. Down in South America, the Inca made something called chicha, a beer made from fermented corn that was used in ritual ceremonies for millennia. Go down to Cusco today and you can still buy a bottle of it at the market. But less is known about the ritualistic practices and uses for alcohol in North America. But the Pueblo, the Apache, and some other tribes seem to be making their own versions of chicha up north. And there's evidence they were doing it long before Columbus ever came to the Americas. Let's think about it this way. If you have a surplus, a stockpile of something, like wheat or corn, eventually some of it's going to spoil. A lot of cultures kept their stores of grain or corn in clay pots. In these humid and warm storage conditions, the grains would often come into contact with airborne yeast that would end up fermenting the sugars in the wheat or corn. And voila, beer. Oh, beer. Agriculture is said to have popped up independently in a few different places. There's still debate on if and when there was any overlap, but Mexico and Central America was one of those independent regions where the earliest evidence for agricultural practices dates back 7,000 years. It figures in that with all the corn they were growing, someone along the line figured out how to turn it into booze. The Apache, a Native American tribe known for their nomadic lifestyle across the southwestern U.S., also have a history of producing tiswin, a weak fermented beer that most likely evolved alongside the development of agricultural practices in the region. They would take maize kernels and submerge them in water until they sprouted a little and then mash them up, sweeten them with mesquite flour or saguaro syrup, and then left to ferment in clay pots. The Tohono O'odham tribe in the Sonoran Desert would make their tiswin from the saguaro cactus, the towering, sometimes 30-foot tall cactus you see in postcards of Arizona. They would pick up the fruit of the saguaro in June, dry it, boil it down to a syrup, then stick it in a clay pot until it was time for their saguaro festival, when they would take the syrup, mix it with water, and let it ferment into their own version of tiswin, a tiswin that was more like a wine. Wonder if that's even good. The use of tiswin in ceremonies and rituals among these tribes predates European colonization. Back in 2007, 800-year-old pieces of pottery from an ancient Pueblo site were found with distinct traces of tiswan. Tiswan was used in blessings and prayers to ancestors and spirits. It was used in important rites of passage and in healing ceremonies as a way of purification. Navajo Tacos. If you saw this, what would you think? Some type of taco, right? Maybe from Mexico or South America? This is actually a Navajo creation, maybe a bit tricked out and taco-like than the original though. The story behind Navajo fry bread is a fascinating and tragic one. Known as da dinalkaz, or something close to that in the Navajo language, fry bread is made from a couple of simple ingredients and deep fried, making it look a bit like a taco shell. So the recipes you'll find online that look like flat tacos piled with beans and guac and other Tex-Mex style fare. The origins of fried bread are intertwined with the history of Native American reservations and challenges faced by indigenous communities. The creation of fry bread is connected to a painful period in Navajo history known as the Long Walk of the 1860s. During this time, the Navajo people were forcibly relocated from their ancestral lands in what is now Arizona and New Mexico to Bosque Redondo, a reservation in eastern New Mexico. This forced migration resulted in limited access to traditional food sources and the imposition of government rations, which included flour, lard, and salt, the ingredients in fry bread. Using the ingredients they had available to them, Navajo women basically invented fry bread as a way to feed their families. They combined flour, lard, salt, and water to form a dough, which was then shaped into discs and fried in hot oil or lard. The result was a simple and versatile bread that people could eat in tough times. Fry bread quickly became a staple in Navajo cuisine and spread to other indigenous communities across the United States as well. It adapted and evolved to reflect the cultural and regional differences of each tribe. And who doesn't like a good taco? So there you go. It's really fascinating how food and diet is connected to culture and migration. Traditional Native American cuisines have had deep spiritual significance. They've been practical reactions to injustice. You know, some foods like kelp might have been a key reason they came to North America in the first place. And of course, a lot of them have simply been delicious. Viking milk and European contact. Did the Vikings make some Native Americans sick by giving them milk? According to the Nordic Vinland saga, they might have, and I bet you never heard of this one. In the saga, a group of Norse explorers led by Leif Erikson landed in North America, in a mysterious place called Vinland. During their exploration, they came into contact with the local indigenous population, whom they call Skraelings. The exact identity of these indigenous people is a bit of a mystery, but many think they must have been Native Americans. In part 1 of the saga, the Vikings established a trading relationship with the Skraelings. Part of that trade included milk the Vikings brought over with their cows. The Skraelings apparently marveled at this new white liquid. If, in fact, they were Native Americans living on the northeast coast of North America, then they most likely didn't have any domesticated animals, so no milk. The natives drank the exotic liquid their new neighbors gave them, but the problem was they were lactose intolerant. The ability to digest any kind of milk other than your mother's when you're an infant is a biologically inherited trait, a trait that the Vikings and a lot of Europeans had, but one that the Native Americans didn't. So they got sick and blamed it on Viking witchcraft, or if not witchcraft, then Viking bad intentions. The Native Americans attacked the Vikings, and there were a lot more natives than Norse. Milk could have contributed to the fact that the Vikings were not able to stay longer in the New World. Sick, angry Skraelings could have driven them out after a well-intentioned drink gave them stomach cramps. Pawpaws, America's secret fruit. What if I told you there's a fruit that grows all along the east coast of the U.S. that tastes as if a mango had you-know-what with a banana and a lime? You might be surprised to learn that the tropical taste and result can be found growing on trees in the woods of upstate New York, or Georgia, or Missouri. Imagine a band of Native Americans wandering somewhere on the East Coast a couple thousand years ago. They've identified a lot of plants that are good to eat and a lot of ones that were fatal. Blueberries, delicious. Hollyberries? Well, Bob ate too many of those and he's no longer with us. It's late August, and this band stumbles upon a grove of medium-sized trees with this fruit the size of a hand and shaped like a big lima bean. One of the natives cuts open the fruit and takes a whiff. It's like nothing he's ever smelled before. One taste, and he's hooked. The pawpaw might be the most delicious fruit you've never heard of. Often referred to as the poor man's banana or the custard apple, the pawpaw has a tropical taste that resembles a mix between mangoes, bananas, and a splash of citrus. and it wasn't brought to the East Coast from somewhere more tropical. It's native to the region, and its range even extends into the Midwest. The pawpaw tree is a smallish tree that grows in understory forest and moist, well-drained soils. It produces big, greenish-yellow fruit with a custard-like texture, which are harvested in late summer and early fall. Native American tribes have a long history of eating pawpaws, with evidence of its consumption dating back thousands of years. The Native American tribes Sioux and Osage ate them. The Iroquois would mash them up and make little cakes. The Pawnee even had a pawpaw month marked off on their calendars. Despite its rich history and unique flavor, pawpaws still remain a mystery to most people, including the people who live in places where the fruit could literally be growing in their backyard. So go and check your backyard after this video. Still, there's a growing interest in recent years among some farmers to cultivate and promote pawpaw trees for their unique fruit. Local communities and farmers markets in areas where pawpaws naturally grow have become popular places to find pawpaws and, in doing so, reconnect with a forgotten indigenous past. Kelp Highway. One of the most important foods for Native Americans might have also been part of the reason why people came to North America in the first place. Seaweed snacks might be pretty popular now, but nearly 16,000 years ago, seaweed could have really been all the rage. The Pacific Northwest is home to massive underwater kelp forests. This kelp can grow up to 175 feet tall, and it provides a home for a whole slew of marine animals like fish, shellfish, seals, and otters. Kelp itself is super nutritious, and people all over the world have been known to eat it. The question is, did Native Americans migrating from Siberia eat it as they traveled along the coast in small boats before there was an ice-free corridor along the Bering Land Bridge? Proponents of coastal migration theory argue that early human populations, aka Native Americans, could have used kelp and the marine life it nurtured as they migrated south along the coast from Siberia. They think these populations may have developed seafaring skills, constructed simple boats, and navigated along the coastline using the kelp forest as a navigational aid and as a source of food during their journey. One key piece of evidence supporting this theory is the presence of early archaeological sites along the Pacific Northwest coast and further inland. One of the most compelling sites is Cooper's Ferry in Idaho, where spear points have been dated to 16,000 years old, about 3,000 years before there was an ice-free corridor for people to walk across into North America. Cooper's Ferry is on a river that feeds into the Columbia River, which feeds into the Pacific Ocean. Farther south, there's also an archaeological site called Monte Verde in Chile, which dates back around 14,500 years. These sites indicate that humans were present in the Americas earlier than we thought. And if they couldn't have walked over, coastal migration might have been how they did it, and kelp likely helped feed them along the way. What other cultures' eating habits are you interested in? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more nutty history.